Theris's lungs were burning. He did not expect the Aurelian Regiment foot guard to be so freakishly quick. He was wearing metallic armour and carrying a spear for the sake of the unruly scamp. How in the nine abyss was he still on his tail? Theris gave these thoughts little attention as he continued powering his short, half-paint legs along the cobbles, dodging and weaving persons and vehicles nimbly, and praying to the silent deities that the armoured racing wren would be more slowed by the obstacles than he was. The mad bloke had now chased him for well over a league, clear across New Heath docks, across the Hollow Trunk Beck, at the New Green Bridge. Theris did not put much stock in physical fitness. Those in the city who had time to dedicate to physical training clearly had too much coin in their pockets. He had forgotten that the regiment was different to the city guard. These guys were professional soldiers who spent most of their time training and marching with heavy equipment, or oiling themselves up to wrestle each other in bizarre and foreign ways. If Theris didn't reach the relative safety of Little Loy soon, this soldier was going to catch him, and Theris doubted handing back his coin purse was going to be enough to sate his anger. Of course, he hadn't meant for him to get hurt. The stoat only bit people half the time, and it was his own fault for trying to hurt the little thing. All he would have to do is remove his armour, and the short-tailed weasel would make his escape, having made enough of a distraction for Theris and his mates to lift what they needed. How was Theris supposed to know that there were certain types of armour you couldn't remove yourself? He wasn't a soldier, was he? This had turned out to be his saving grace though. Had the soldier managed to remove his armour, there is no way he would have been able to outrun him. Sal the Stoat was not so lucky. Theris could see the blood leaking from the joints in the leg of the warrior's heavy defences, and he knew that whilst Sal would have fought tooth and nail, clawing to escape, and was no doubt responsible for much of the red liquid splashed about his tassets, Theris knew that the little stoat had been crushed and compacted when the guardsman had thrown himself to the ground and began furiously thrusting his lower body against the hard cobbles of the Aventine Road. His pursuer had been hurt and humiliated. There was no way that Theris was going to get away with a stern talking to, or a perfunctory dipping in the Hollow Trunk Beck. He was going to have to cut across the green. Now some of the others in his little posse liked to claim they'd run the gauntlet across the green, but as Voltairine Castro would sing in her infamous skit, they're all full of shit, but I love them. Theris was nearly totally out of breath, and moving slower now. There was no way he'd be able to dodge the traps and the Crown ballista battery for long. But maybe... Theris took a sharp left onto the green, just as he heard the unmistakable sound of full-plate armour rattling just behind him. Theris used the very last iota of his remaining strength and energy to accelerate, dodge and weave between caltrops and reinforced ankle traps. Snap. The sound filled Theris with relief. He darted quickly again to the right, careful to avoid the traps and range markers scattered about the place. He came to rest just outside the final range marker that the city guard had helpfully placed along the green to indicate the maximum range of the ballista battery mounted on the walls of the citadel. He sucked in deep breaths and sprawled himself out, arms wide, legs akimbo, letting the ocean breeze cool his sweating brow. The pursuing guardsman wasn't screaming, so he was either dead or had no idea what danger he was in. After a minute or so of catching his breath on the edge of the notorious kill zone, Theris sat up to watch the show. The ballistas had just fired their second ranging shot, which had fallen well short and well wide of the plated wren, who appeared to be lying in a not too dissimilar position to that which Theris had just abandoned. The man had removed his helmet and was clearly still trying to recover his breath, the adrenaline of the chase having left him. He looked to be in quite the state. He had not yet even attempted to remove the ankle trap from his armoured leg, and was totally oblivious to his impending death. "Hey! Ori!" shouted Theris to the supine soldier. He pointed towards the looming fortifications of the citadel in the distance and continued. "Once they've got you ranged, they're going to let out a volley that will turn you into a pimplo." A thick wooden shaft impacted the ground, punctuating Theris's point. "You might want to get that rig off before they do." It was difficult to read the young soldier's face at this distance, but the sudden flurry of activity clearly indicated panic. The armoured guardsman pulled furiously at the ankle trap, desperately trying to pry its locked teeth from his plated shouse. As another shaft impacted the ground closer to the soldier, Theris saw him throw himself supine again, smashing the ground with his armed fists and kicking helplessly at the trap with his free leg. The whole spectacle had a sort of macabre fascination about it, and Theris nearly missed the crowd of spectators beginning to grow at the edge of the green. He quickly darted away from the scene, heading north into Murky Mile before turning his jacket inside out, donning his patterned flat cap, and looping back to the green past the guard post in Riku Square, ensuring to tip his hat to constables Nubby and Debris before joining the crowd of ghoulish rubberneckers on the edge of the killing zone. Slipping and sneaking his way to the front of the crowd, Theris was met by a peculiar and comedic sight. The renowned Captain Ironside of the City Guard was standing only paces away from where Theris had been lying minutes prior, catching his breath. The heavily armoured Aurelian Regiment soldier was surrounded by thick wooden stakes sticking out of the ground all around him, with the exception of the odd one or two which lay broken next to the unharmed soldier. Theris turned to an elderly, grey-haired wren standing next to him at the front of the crowd and inquired, "What did I miss?" The elderly fellow turned to Theris slowly, leaning heavily on a gnarled wooden cane, and spoke with apparent great effort. "The lucky so-and-so took a full load, and all it did was ring his bell. The captain is trying to come up with a plan to get the young man out." The old man's voice was drowned out by the sound of the crowd's simultaneous cries like curious anguish as another volley of ballista bolts impacted the ground where the soldier lay trapped. Theris had turned back just in time to see a single shaft impact the pauldron of the warrior, pushing him forcefully over onto his side, but shattering harmlessly. Captain Lorbois darted into the kill zone quickly, grabbing something from the ground just out of the reach of the now supine soldier and tossing it to him. It was only as the soldier began to affix the object over his head that Theris realised it must be the warrior's helmet, which he had discarded in order to catch his breath. The crowd erupted into whistles, hoots and cheers before beginning a powerful chant of "Lorbois, Lorbois, Lorbois." The captain, having lithely bounded out of the killing zone, was shouting something to the man, but Theris was unable to hear what over the din of the crowd. After a few moments, the armoured soldier curled himself into the fetal position around his trapped leg, attempting to cover as many of his joints and weak spots as possible with his cuirass. Captain Lorbois was now bounding proudly over to his adoring fans, his arms raised in the air and making a slight downward gesture with his hands to indicate that he needed silence. After a few moments, a deep, gruff voice from somewhere near the front of the crowd shouted, "Quiet!" The crowd had now doubled in size and was blocking most of the main thoroughfare. "The poor chap is in serious need of our help. He's scared out of his senses and he seems to think he has a dead rat in his trousers. His armour is doing a good job of deflecting the bolts at this range, but it's only a matter of time until his luck runs out." The captain spoke confidently and with purpose, unclipping his helmet and resting it under his arm casually as he addressed the crowd. "Now, I don't want any of you putting yourselves in danger, but there are ways that we can bring this to a happy and safe conclusion. You there, Theris O'Phil," said Lorbois, pointing directly at the young half-paint. It both impressed and annoyed Theris that Captain Lawbar seemed to know everyone in the city by name, but particularly those from Little Loiren. "Get to a guard post on the square and ask Constable Debris for reinforcements. Tell him it's an emergency." The captain continued, gesturing to the elderly man Ferris had been conversing with earlier. "Mr. Kara, you must have something at the apothecary we can use to keep this boy calm and to help with his injuries once he's out. Of course, take your time, but if you could spare some of your tinctures and medicines, the guard would be most appreciative." He then pointed to another person, obscured to Ferris by the much taller citizenry clustered around him. "Kongal, get to the Tanaka smithy and see if they have anything we can use to build a shielding wall, or if all else fails, grab as many sturdy shields as they can spare." Lawbar then opened his arms wide, gesturing to the group at large. "Everyone else, please clear the thoroughfare and follow the instructions of the city guard as they set up a cordon. We don't want anyone else getting hurt. The best thing you can do to help is to keep yourself safe and well so that we can resolve this situation quickly." Much to Ferris's surprise, the large crowd slowly but surely began to follow the captain's instructions. Lawbar was looking directly at Ferris now, expectantly. Ferris felt a compulsion to bang up a salute and call him sir. He felt this surge up through him, but he managed to resist the impulse. Ferris waited until most everyone was out of earshot before he spoke. He wished to speak with passion and purpose, but he could barely meet the captain's gaze. "What does it matter to me if some shill gets shuffled off by some parasite royal? Just another dead jackboot as far as I'm concerned. You'll all get what's coming to you in the end, Captain." Before Ferris had even finished his barely audible act of resistance, Captain Lawbar Ironside was blowing powerfully on the shrill whistle which dangled from a chain in his pocket, signalling to any officer in the area that there was a guardsman in need of aid. Captain Lawbar turned his gaze back to Ferris, and much to his surprise, gave him a warm smile. "Get yourself home, Ferris. Your friends will be worried sick." And with that, he returned to blowing on his shrill whistle, leaving Ferris with a feeling of deep shame and regret. Ferris decided he would probably change some of the details of this story when he told it to the rest of the posse. If he got to tell it to any of the Saginaw boys, he'd tell them that he'd lured the Ori into a trap and then told old Ironside where he could shove it. Ivanish's boys were hardcore. They'd love that, for sure.